It's Memphis Memories and Metamucil. It's the outdated wrestling hour. Baby. Careful, only one spoonful. Hi, this is Bob Smith. You might remember me from my days way back when Methuselah was a young boy, when bologna was 9 cents a pound, and I was the managing editor of Pro Wrestling Illustrated. And welcome back to the Outdated Wrestling Hour with Bob Smith, a selectively listened to podcast, but I'm proud of our success nonetheless. Now, today we are going to look back and go back the old Memphis way, as Jack Reynolds used to say, and bring on a great guest in Mayor John McCall, who has his own wonderful podcast called Wrasslin Talk with Mayor McCall, all about Memphis itself. But I wanted to pick his brain on who he thought were the greatest stars of Memphis wrestling, and he has a top 10. We hope we jog your memory and bring back some really good memories of some really great stars you may have forgotten about. So hold on to your hats. We'll be right back. But before that, I want you to listen to our first commercial announcement of the day about a form of radio you may have thought died 50 years ago. But a rock and roll legend knows it's still alive, and he wants to tell you all about it. So hold on for a second, and then we'll get on with our interview with Mayor John McCall. Where you going? Get your hand off that dial and hang out, will you? We'll be right back.
This is Joe Walsh. One thing I do when I'm not playing rock and roll is get on the air as an amateur radio operator. Also called ham radio, is a communication service provided by ordinary people just like you and me. We have a national emergency communication system in place 24/7, 365. Find out more about amateur radio at arrl.org/What is ham radio? See you on the air.
My guest is an esteemed figure who has his own podcast all about the history of Memphis professional wrestling. He's Mayor John McCall. He's here for the second time, and we're going to look at the greats. We're going to keep it in the ring, aren't we, John?
Hey, Bob, what an honor to come be a guest on your podcast for the second time. So once again, thanks for having me back, and I've been looking excited talking to you today, sir.
Well, before we get started, hype yourself a little bit. Tell the people about your podcast and what's been going on with your exciting show.
Yes, sir. I'm Mayor McCall. My podcast is Wrasslin Talk with Mayor McCall. We focus on old school Memphis wrestling, old school territories, focus some on championship wrestling from Florida. It extends, all over. And our goal is to keep the memories and legends alive from yesterday. So we, line up, interviews with, stars and legends of the past and get to hear, firsthand accounts and some really cool stories. And I've been blessed to interview some of the top names in wrestling. All the way from Handsome Jimmy to Tommy Rich to the Fabulous Ones to Coco Beware, the Mountie, IRS, the $1 Million Man, Baby Doll. It just Downtown Bruno, Randy Hales, Rip Rogers. I've got the pleasure of introducing the great Bob Smith. That was a big deal for us. But just all glory be to God, man. We've had some special things going on, and it's been a blessing.
And you've done all that in just a year, I would think, right? Because I started mine in January of last year. You were around at that same time, right?
Yes, sir. We just through some blessings, we had some big doors open up for us and meet some people that really supported us and were real friends to us. And
Well, the beauty part about your show, in my eyes anyway, is that I think you're filling a niche in your area where you live, and that the several states around where you broadcast, you broadcast your podcast from. There's nothing else like your show. I mean, it's myopic in looking back at a specific era, at a specific time, and specific stars. And nobody else has been doing that. And I think that's the key to your success so far.
Thank you. I definitely wanted to do something, differentiated and just do something different from, the rest of the world. And, what better to do in your free time is track down, Memphis wrestling stars and, and national wrestling stars and talk to them and have a conversation with them. What's better than that?
Yeah, tell
That's
me
my
about it.
hobby.
Yeah, it's not a bad hobby to have, and have the reaction from the wrestlers. Are they as one podcaster or another? The biggest, I guess, chore or the most hard thing to do sometimes is come up with guests. Right? Sometimes you're a little cold. I go through a period like I just did a solo show, the one that's out as we speak, because I had a little period where I didn't have a guest coming on to interview. Now I've got like 8 in the next 2 weeks. But the thing is, how have the wrestlers responded when you say who you are and what you're doing? Do they gladly come on the show? Has it been easy or hard finding the guests for your program?
It's been hard and it's been easy on one hand. I mean, on one hand, if I'll use for example somebody. I'll go ahead and put him out there. Somebody that's really, really been a blessing and opened some doors and really helped me out is Steve Kern.
Mm-hmm.
He's done some he's done some big things for me and Willie. And I'm on uh I'm on lunch break and I work some obscure weird hours at work or whatever, and I don't get a lot of time during the week to see my wife and spend time with my beautiful, awesome wife. Who's my best friend. I do what I got to do, and I work. I work a lot, and I work different hours. So typically on my lunch break, like that's what I do. I'll talk to my wife, and I typically try not to break that for too much because that might be the only time I really get to have a conversation with her that day. So she even knows it's kind of weird if I get off the phone with her or anything. So I'm sitting in my car and I look at my car phone and it says Steve Kern. And I said, babe, let me call you back. She's like, something wrong? I said, no. I said, Steve usually just texts, but he's calling. I said, let me see what this is about and what's going on. So I answered the phone and Steve was like, John? I said, yes, sir. He said, how would you like to talk to the $1 million man, Ted DiBiase? I was like, are you kidding me? Of course I would love to talk to Ted. He was like, I got another question for you. I was like, okay. He said, how would you like for Ted to do your podcast? I was like, man, that would be amazing. He's like, well, I've already talked to him about it. And hey, here's Ted, and puts Ted on the phone. And man, what a wonderful guy. And so I said, you'd be interested in doing it? And he said, yeah, sure. He's like, what's your he said, I'm gonna give you my email. And he said, oh hell. He said, you're friends with Steve. He said, here's my number. So it worked out, and having an awesome interview with Ted. And he introduced me to Mike Rotunda. Got to kind of be a part of Mike during the time like he's going through a difficult time and everything now. And hopefully shows like mine and yours, Bob, like they bring joy back to people. So that's what it's all about too, man. Bringing, not only we do it for the fans, I love to do it for some of these guys because I think that some of these guys think the world has forgot about them and they didn't care about all the time they missed from their family and the broken bones and the crummy motels and the low payouts and all like that. They're happy that somebody like me and Bob Smith still remember them and appreciate the hell out of what they did to entertain us and all the sacrifices they made. And I'm sure to let them know that as well, because they need to hear that too. We appreciate the hell out of what they did for us to entertain us on holidays. And there's 365 days in a year. They were gone 430.
Mm-hmm.
And that's
Yeah.
that's the truth of the matter. So.
But I look at wrestling like I'm still 12 years old. I care about what happens in the ring. I care about what happens in the programs. I like to delve into the wrestling old school psychology about how they get from one thing to another and how a show comes about. I do not care about backstage gossip. I do not care about controversy. I do not care about some guy not being used right or not pushed. I don't think in those terms. It's not entertaining to me. the whole idea of this podcast, the Outdated Wrestling Hour, is to bring back that outdated way of thinking of I'm really enjoying this wrestling program. Let's see what's happening next. Let's watch the matches. That's it. Or let's hear the interviews. That's it. That's enough for me. And I don't understand the mindset of today's fans, but you know what? The whole world has changed since you and I were kids, and time marches on. The way things are presented or changed. The wrestling industry's doors have been flung wide open, whereas when I was growing up, they were closed. If you know what I mean, in terms of
That's how I present
kayfabe.
some of this is how I present some of this as well. I'm like, I let the guys know. I'm like, a lot of YouTube interviews on YouTube and other podcasts, and I'm like, look, brother, I'm not a shoot style interview. I don't care what happened, this and that, or I don't care about the drama or like I want, I care about, you being in that match at the moment or something, important that was, worthwhile in your career, looking back.
Mm-hmm. There you go. By the way,
Like, I'm not here to talk about drama. I'm here to talk about that 15-time Southern AWA championship, I mean,
you're right. Yeah, that meant something to a lot of people back then and even now. And let me just interject. The name of his podcast is Wrasslin Talk with Mayor McCall. I just want to make sure that you know that name and you know where to find it, which is, well, everywhere podcasts are heard. Isn't that right?
yes, sir, that's correct. Everywhere podcasts are heard.
So there you go. If you haven't tuned in, you really need to. So now we're going to have a little fun. I have asked Mayor McCall here to come up with who he considers to be his top 10 in the history of Memphis wrestling. And he's given us a lot of work, a lot of thought. And I'm going to just let you go and allow me to interject in between the names, and we'll have a little fun. And when you're done, I'm just going to give tribute to a whole mess of other people who were either Memphis regulars or people who passed through. Because you know what? Between the promotions and the wrestlers and the eras, Memphis wrestling, you're going to have to talk me out of the fact that it may have been maybe the top territory for many years in independent wrestling in terms of not being, let's say, an NWA territory, an AWA territory, whatever you want to call it. There were times when they were affiliated with the AWA, and some of the championships were. But let's just call it Memphis was its own thing. Doesn't matter who they were affiliated with. Memphis had its own style and flavor, and nobody knows that better than you do.
Well, I got to say, first of all, this is probably one of the biggest challenges I've had since I've had this podcast. Nobody has quite put me on the spot and say, "Hey, man, what is your top 4, your Mount Rushmore, or your top 10, your top 20? Like, who are your in order? Who are your all time the best wrestlers you think that represented Memphis wrestling history as a whole?" So. Okay, you want to have some fun with this, so let's have some fun. So now I'm gonna flip the script on you, Bob, putting
Uh-oh.
you on the spot. You challenged me. You put me through hours of grief over here.
Oh,
So
heck.
you're coming you're coming out of the gate, man. Who's the number one all time Memphis wrestler?
I don't have to think twice. It's the King.
Okay, so we're starting this show off on the same accord. I see. Okay, so
But you know what? We're not geniuses, because you know what? If you've ever been to Memphis, Tennessee, like I was, that one glorious week in 1991, I did go back a few years later too, by the way. But there was that one glorious week I spent in company of the USWA people in 91. Jerry Lawler was just it around town. You would open a newspaper, you see his face on an auto ad or something like that. You see his face on a billboard. He was everywhere. And you didn't have to be a wrestling
everywhere.
fan to be a Jerry Lawler fan, because he had a Sunday morning talk show too. But he was more than that. He was a fantastic, believable wrestler who was just built the right way. He didn't have big bulging muscles, but he was a big man and a big star. Nobody could talk like him. Nobody was funnier than him. You go on with this, because you know what? Jerry Lawler was just probably one of the 5 greatest wrestlers of all time, no matter where it was.
Nobody could talk like him. I mean, there's some that can get close, and there's some that have their own unique style that never be, duplicated as long as we ever live. But there's just nobody quite like Jerry the King Lawler. There's not. He sets himself apart on so many different facets. I mean, the talker, the wrestler, the commentator, the booker, the artist. I mean, you name it, like he's Jerry Lawler in the wrestling world. There's nothing that he can't accomplish.
Well, you know what people don't talk about when they talk about Jerry Lawler is his surprising athleticism. like the flying fist off the ropes. When he'd have a opponent cornered, those fast boxing like punches to the head and face. He had the fastest fist in wrestling for a long time. He was a really good athlete, and people don't give him enough credit for his athleticism. Do you agree with that or no?
I totally agree with that. And what a lot of people need to understand too, if Vince McMahon, if Vince had someone that he wanted to learn how to really throw a punch, who do you think he hooked him up with? Hey, you need to go see the King. King can teach you how to throw a work punch.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm sure that's true. And another thing is he was a master psychologist. He would always have a surprise, like maybe a fireball to the face or a chain wrapped around the fist, or, because he was a heel and a face on and off throughout his entire career, depending on where he was and what he was doing. Just a great thinker, just a tremendous creative mind. All his matches, you never knew what was going to happen.
He was a creative genius. There's no doubt about it. And you hook him up with somebody like Jerry Jarrett, and they create magical wrestling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think Andy Kaufman feud. Come on now. I mean, one of the great moments of late night talk show history. I mean, when they were on the Letterman show together and they had the little fight, and it was just magic, absolute magic. I mean,
that was sports entertainment before there was sports entertainment.
Exactly right. Yep. There's no question about that. So, okay, Jerry Lawler, we all know him. I wish he was still working, but all good things must come to an end. But you know what? I'm hoping Jerry, if you're listening, I hope you get well enough soon that you're part of the scene again, because we miss you, don't we?
Everybody loves Lawler. If you know anything about wrestling, period. I mean, Jerry Lawler, you love Jerry Lawler. There's no question about it. And
let's not
get well, King.
And don't forget his commentating. Tremendous color, man. Just absolutely outstanding.
Tremendous.
Yep. So, all right, now it gets interesting because I'm going to ask for number 2.
Number 2, without this man, there is no Jerry Lawler. He was often imitated, never duplicated. Jackie Fargo.
Oh, we're in total agreement. I'm looking at my own list here, and it's like we're 2 for 2 together so far. For people who have never seen Jackie Fargo, anybody who ever strutted across the ring owes it to Jackie, don't they?
Absolutely. A lot of people have tried to mimic it. Ric Flair, Jeff Jarrett, Billy Joe Travis, Hot Stuff Eddie Gilbert, Jerry Lawler himself. I mean, you name it. I mean, the Fargo strut is it. That was it.
Tremendous. And
Jackie could bring up that Coliseum with that strut, or anywhere in the territory.
He was a star by himself. He was a star in 2 different brother tag teams. He was absolutely, and he wrestled in more than just Memphis. I mean, Jackie Fargo was known all around the country for his, I don't know, sneaky ways, shall we say, in some territories. Am I right about that?
Oh, Fargo was a big NWA star, no doubt about it. He spanned like 3 decades. I mean, yeah, he's the man.
Yeah, and let's face it, Jerry Lawler openly admits he learned so much from him. He learned what to do and what not to do, according to Lawler. If the story, the stories he tells about never be seen before the show, don't be mingling with the crowd. It was Jackie Fargo that taught Jerry the ins and outs, the intricacies of keeping your, I guess, status as a real professional wrestler.
Keeping kayfabe.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I wish more people had seen Jackie Fargo. Listen here, when did he retire? Around 1980 or so, or something like that? A little later than that?
It was a little bit later than that. I want to say around probably mid 80s, maybe.
Right. I think that's right. Mm-hmm. That's right. Because I saw a picture of some kind of a 6-man tag, and they were teaming him up with some people who are a little more contemporary. So I think you're right on the money about that. But no, Jackie Fargo was
a lot at the end, of course, like he'd done early in his career, but he still hung on, a couple years though.
Mm-hmm. Okay. The strutting, ultra confident, blonde-haired bomber, Jackie Fargo. Nobody like him. Okay, time for number 3.
Number 3, the superstar, Bill Dundee.
Oh my gosh, 3 for 3. I have my fist in the air. You can't see me, fans, because it's like I'm following his list along with mine. And so far, we are smacked together on this. Bill Dundee, I've said this on the show many times, nobody ever did more with less. Not gifted in the height department. You'd never know. Nobody talked about his height once the bell rang. He was as rough and tough and great as a heel and a baby face. Perfect for Memphis. He's a legend there. He really was superstar Bill Dundee, wasn't he?
Absolutely. I mean, he could, put on that cape and, get in that Cadillac. I mean, he was Elvis in Memphis, Tennessee. I mean, yeah, Bill Dundee, no doubt about it, was a superstar. And he's one of those, like, Batman has to have the Joker type deals. I mean, Lawler and Dundee, what do you say about it? Their feud started around 1977 and spanned, this is how long the feud went on. The very first episode in 1998 of Memphis Power Pro Wrestling, when Randy Hales um, brought it back. What Dave Brown was and Corey Macklin. They was like, "Hey, it's the final confrontation here on today's show. Bill Dundee against Jerry Lawler." After all those years, it still worked in Memphis, and they've had some legendary tag team runs together. They've worked opposite of each other and they've worked with each other. But, I think Bill Dundee is just one of these people, that you had to have him there to carry the territory. You needed Bill Dundee. And as you alluded to, he was rough and tough as they came after the bell ring. Like, no, he was 7 foot tall. He was handling
Right.
business. There was nothing Bill Dundee couldn't do. I mean, against the biggest guy, Bill could bring him down and have the Coliseum in an uproar,
Mm-hmm. And you know what? You made a great point before. Memphis was sports entertainment before there was sports entertainment, because not only did he feud with Lawler, he also tag teamed with Lawler. So depending, as the years went by, they both switched guises over and over again, but it was always believable. It was always for a reason. And you never knew what you're going to see when you watch Memphis wrestling, and you never knew what Dundee was going to do. He was a major talent, and should be in every Hall of Fame there is, as far as I'm concerned.
The key to Lawler, going back to number one Lawler, the key to Lawler and Dundee is they could have the crowd emotionally and the fans emotionally invested, whether it was at the Coliseum to see them do battle against each other, what was going to happen next, or hey, we're pulling for Bill and Jerry to bring the AWA, Southern Tag Team title back to Memphis, so
Mhm.
both of them could have you emotionally invested.
And with that wonderful TV show guiding it along, I gotta give the props again to the Memphis Studio Wrestling Show, the best wrestling weekly program in the history of professional wrestling. That is my considered opinion, because I've seen them all. Nothing compared to the vibe of Channel 5. It was great. And I missed that show. I'm telling you, that was one of the highlights of my PWI days. It's getting that tape in the mail every Monday after the Saturday show would come out. What a blast that show was. I hope you feel the same way. I think you do.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Now, I bet we're not the same on number 4, but I know
Mm,
who I have written down, and you go right ahead.
Well, we're probably gonna, as I said before, this was quite the challenge, and
Mhm,
so
yeah, at this
we're
point,
probably.
yeah, it's gonna be a challenge, so go ahead. You remember
I,
now, this is, these are all great wrestlers. No matter where they are on the list, they deserve it, so I don't think placement matters as much as the fact they made the list to begin with, you know what I'm saying? So go right ahead. Feel confident. Who's your number 4?
Absolutely, and like this was a little stressful too, but as I told you before, at the end of the day, there's so many variations, and it's subjective. There's thousands, there's hundreds of great Memphis wrestlers, and it's only subjective. But you know, um, number 4, Sputnik Monroe.
Good one. Good one. I was glad you had him that high, because you know what? A lot of people forget that name when they talk about Memphis, but he was one of the fathers of Memphis wrestling. Am I right?
Absolutely. I mean, he can be accredited to the integration of Memphis wrestling, far as black and white. He was who he was, and he lived his life like he wanted to live his life. And he was in Memphis in the territory at a time where segregation. That's just how it was, and it was forbidden. To cross those barriers. He stood up for himself in public. He stood up for himself in court, and he made a lot of changes, and he's an innovator of bringing people together, and he was a tough SOB. My
Mhm,
goodness, he
mhm.
was.
Yes, he was. And, I wish there was more tape of him so younger fans could get to see him in action, because it's like they hear the name and you have to admit Sputnik was a very unique, first name, based off the space program or what have you, but, he was a brawler extraordinaire, am I right?
Oh, yeah, he was. I mean, legendary matches with Billy Wicks, and oh my goodness, it's just Sputnik was. That's back when they say wrestling was real. You had to actually be a legit tough guy to
Mhm.
make it, even, mentally and physically, far as in the ring and politically and everything like that. You had to be mentally tough back then, too. And he was.
No kidding. I mean, let's face it, the stars of the 50s, 60s, and 70s, my gosh. It's like you really had to be a cut above to even be the first preliminary wrestler on a card. Those were big, tough, strong men and strong of will because you know what? It's the most physical ruling sport there is. And the travel didn't make it any easier. And these were Sputnik is definitely amongst the forefathers of pro wrestling. And I think he doesn't get talked about enough. So the fact you have it number four, you can't see him. I'm saluting John here because it's like, that's a tremendous pick. That's just great.
Who did you go with number 4?
I had Eddie Gilbert.
Hot stuff, Eddie Gilbert.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But you know what? We'll get to my picks later. Let's go to number 5.
5, the Boogie Woogie Man, handsome Jimmy Valiant.
Wow, that's great. Okay. Yeah. You see, this is our lists are a little different, but the fact that you are getting all these eras in within your top 5 is a big deal. The Jimmy Valiant of Memphis was way different than the East Coast Jimmy Valiant in the beginning. In 1972, he entered the scene in the WWF as a handsome babyface, ergo handsome Jimmy Valiant, right? And by, I think, late 71 or early 72, he had turned on Chief Jay Strongbow and became a real wise guy, smart mouth, long-haired punk, so to speak. Now, by the time he got to Memphis, he had changed a little, didn't he?
Yeah, I think he became like the Boogie Woogie Man, I want to say around 1980, 1981.
Mm-hmm.
Not only being the superstar and showman that he was, he made so high on my list as well because, as everybody can recall, when 1981, when Calhoun tackled Lawler wrong and Lawler went down for that year with that leg injury, it was people like Handsome Jimmy that saved the territory. Things could have really went south, and they accredited a lot of that to Jimmy Hart too, building up feuds and angles with the First family, but Lawler was the star in this area. So I contribute to people like, Handsome Jimmy is keeping the crowds at the Mid-South Coliseum while the King was down. So, and Handsome was the type of wrestler that could carry that weight on his shoulders for a brief period of time. Nobody can do it like the King, but hey, he stepped up and he carried a lot on his shoulders for a little while. He did.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned Jimmy Hart. He's not a wrestler. But you know what? Who is more influential in the history of Memphis wrestling than Jimmy Hart for a bunch of different reasons? I mean, he was kind of the straw that stirred the drink for at least a decade around there, and he's a real standard when it comes to heel managers. He was about as good as it gets.
Absolutely. It doesn't really get any better than Jimmy Hart and like Bobby the Brain Heenan, right up there. I mean, there's Jimmy Hart is just a pure genius, and he was like Lawler was too. Jimmy Hart could talk. Boy, could he talk.
You got to be really intelligent to say that many words that fast. He could a mile a minute, abrasive, but that sold tickets. He'd make you. You know what? Even when he got to the WWF and he's running around the ring with that siren on his
the megaphone,
didn't you want to just smash him? He was just so annoying. But that's a skill. To be that much of a tool sells tickets. And everybody disliked him immensely in the WWF territory. And I'm sure it was even worse in Memphis.
oh man, he could have you so emotionally invested, like he was like such a little weasel punk, like he just wanted Lawler just to get his hands on him so bad, but he kept you on the edge of your toes too, because that he could back up what he said too. It's like, Lawler, baby, I'm gonna have somebody at that Coliseum Monday night. It's gonna break that leg, Jack, gonna take that horse on down, and getting the like, who's Hart gonna have? And he managed the top guys. If you saw a top guy back then, he had to have the services of Jimmy Hart to be successful.
Mm-hmm. It's such an influential guy. All right. What are we down to now? 6? Is this right? Yeah.
6, yeah.
Okay. Who's going to rock that 6 spot?
Tojo Yamamoto.
Yes. I am so glad. Here's why. Most of the younger fans who saw Tojo Yamamoto in either Texas or Memphis, that late, or I should say late 80s, early 90s period, he was a manager. And I think most of the younger fans, even people into their 40s, remember him as a manager. People do not realize what a draw he was as a wrestler in Memphis. And he had a tremendous tag team with Jerry Jarrett. He did all kinds of things. Another guy who kind of flipped back and forth between heel and face. But he was a big draw in Memphis for a long time and an integral part of Memphis wrestling.
Once again, it was that master heel draw. I mean, you like Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941. So that, and in terms of years, not that far removed, within the country. So you had Tojo Yamamoto that could play this sneaky type epitome of evil, Japanese character, and that had people completely hooked.
Mm-hmm.
Master heel, like you could, envision him back, just sneaking around the commentating table with Lance Russell and Dave Brown, just a sneaky dude that could, like a snake could, strike at any moment.
Right. And he was a mainstay there, an absolute mainstay. I mean, he would kind of disappear from the scene for a little bit, and then he'd always come back in one guise or another. And like I say, underrated as a worker in the ring. He was the sinister heel that everybody paid money to come see get beat. And he's a legend. That was Tojo, and one of the greats. I'm so happy you're listing these old timers that high, because it gives people a better, I think, understanding of the history of Memphis wrestling that way. So well done, John. Okay, let's keep going. I want another, because this is going to be a lot of fun. So give me another one. We're up to 7.
Number 7, I had to get away from the singles mindset. I had to bring a tag team in here. The fabulous one, Steve Kern and Stan Lane.
You can't beat them. Have you ever seen a reaction from fans like they got?
Never.
No, never. There was nothing like it. The whole arena would shake. I mean, first of all, the women loved them for obvious reasons. They were two really handsome, masculine guys. But secondly, there was just something about the way they blended together. It was natural. They were almost, I don't want to be corny, but it also seemed like they were born to be a tag team together. They were a natural fit from the word go. A lot of promoters tried these handsome guy tag teams, and they worked for about 6 weeks. These guys became legendary because they had it. They could both work, and were scintillating with their style. I mean, one of the top 5 tag teams of all time in my eyes.
Jerry Jarrett and Jackie Fargo call a once in a lifetime lightning in a bottle with these two.
Mm-hmm.
Just the pairing was unbelievable, and the reason they rank so high on my list, being a tag team, is because they were trendsetters and innovators. They set the way for teams like the Rock and Roll Express, the Pretty Young Things, the Fantastics, other teams. These guys were it, and people that wasn't students of Memphis wrestling or wasn't in the territory will never realize that these guys were probably like the closest thing to the Beatles.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you took them to like Poplar Avenue or somewhere in Midtown Memphis or anywhere in the territory, I mean, it's these guys were straight it.
Yep.
And male and female. The women wanted to talk to him, and the guys wanted to be just like them.
Right. And you know what? They were so good, just generally, that they both could have been promoted as world championship singles competitors at the same time. And I know they had some shots, but there was something about the magic when they got together. It was, like I said, the place would come unglued when they would just walk down the aisle and play that music. They were it for a long time.
Well, I just, I was just had the pleasure of interviewing Willie B, and I interviewed both of them. And I will say they were 15-time Southern AWA tag team champions.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Number 7, that they were the fabulous ones, Steve Kern and Stan Lane.
Can't argue. I wasn't looking for tag teams, but I don't care. I think your placement is right on the money. I really do. That's what makes this stuff so much fun. All right. Okay. Here comes number 8.
Number 8 is the Birdman, Coco Beware.
Really? Now, this one surprises me a little bit. Explain why you picked him so high.
This one surprises everybody a lot, and this one nobody really sees this one coming because there's Austin Idol, there's Dutch Mantel, there's so many other guys that they're like, how does Coco fit that spot? Well, Coco fits that spot if you get down in the history. He had some legendary feuds with like handsome Jimmy Valiant. If you've never went back and watched him and Norville Austin with the Pretty Young Things, and that was set to Michael Jackson and everything. Lawler helped create that, and that was also magic in the bottle and the territory. And they were some of the people that would interact with the crowd like they did. And honestly, Coco makes the list too, because we're not just, when you talk Memphis wrestling, you can't just talk CWA. You have to talk CWA, USWA, and Power Pro Wrestling. I mean, after that, I consider the end of Memphis wrestling when Power Pro went out. I don't Memphis Championship Wrestling and all. It was just hanging on by a thread. It was to keep some stuff alive. But I consider in my book, Memphis wrestling officially died with Power Pro Wrestling.
I would tend to agree with that too. I don't think you're being controversial a lot. It's just that's basically what happened.
And Coco was a mainstay. Coco had a lot to do in the USWA, and Coco had a lot to do with Power Pro. Coco never forgot where he came from, and Coco always was a part of Memphis wrestling, in my opinion and book.
Oh yeah,
Coco beware.
When I came to visit Memphis in 2000 and I forget the year, I came to play with my band at BB King's Club, and I went to see Jerry Lawler at the TV studio, and there was Coco. I said, he's back here. So you're right. He would always return to Memphis in between, naturally he was a big star in the WWF as well with his, the Birdman gimmick, but I'll tell you what, he could go. Great drop kick, right? My gosh.
Best in the business. Hands down, best missile drop kick in the business.
Yeah. And, he was deceivingly strong. Another guy who was not big of stature, but once the bell rang, you forgot all about it. He was a whirling dervish in there. You couldn't stop him.
And look what he did. Look what he did to give back and all. Like a young Terry Bollea, fans know him as Hulk Hogan, helping him train him at Herb Welch's ranch and Tennessee and all like that. So taking the extra time to help develop the stars. And Coco always knew his place. I challenge anybody to go back and watch tapes of Coco. Coco was the master seller. He could put anyone in the business over and make them look like $1 million. One of the best sellers ever to wrestle in the history of professional wrestling.
All right, that's a great pick. I'm enjoying this. And now we're already down to number 9. Can you believe it? And who is this?
Number 9, because he never forgot where he came from, and he was always a mainstay through the CWA, through Power Pro, is Wildfire Tommy Rich.
Wow. Eventual NWA World Champion for a spell.
One of the youngest ones ever.
He had that moment. He had that. He was so red hot when he won that overall NWA championship that he couldn't be denied at that point. And people look back and go, oh, it was a mistake giving him the belt if they weren't going to keep it on. I don't think so. I think, he was the man of that moment, the same way Kerry Von Erich was years later in winning that belt. Do you agree with that? Absolutely.
And you gotta give Tommy, and Tommy made this high on the list as well too, because in my opinion, and if all things equal, there might be one or two, but that would have to be the greatest moment, one of the greatest moments ever of keeping kayfabe alive, hiding under the ring in 1987 at the Mid-South Coliseum for like 6 hours on like basically a pool float air mattress with a 6-pack of beer, just to come out and assist in the hair versus hair Austin Idol and Jerry Lawler match that put the Coliseum in a frenzy.
Under the ring deals now, there's usually a tunnel they can crawl under, and they've set it up differently in the modern era of technology. He had to literally be under that ring. He had to be under that ring for like forever, right?
Yeah, I had the pleasure of interviewing him. It was like 6 hours, and it was like a pool float, and I'm glad I got to clear up the mystery and everything too, because if you go online, it's like, well, Tommy Rich had a case of beer and had this and that. No, I cleared it up. He said it was only a 6-pack. He was able to deliver 2 pal drivers and only had a 6-pack of beer. So, great times at the Mid-South Coliseum. But that you have to be a specimen of a man to stay under that ring, and be able to get out and be agile and functional like that too. That just talks about what a great athlete he is. And he also came back to the USWA and Power Pro. He had teamed up with Doug Gilbert, and he did a lot of things, in the territory, and he never forgot where he came from. So Tommy Rich was number 9.
I always remember him once he put that Des press on you, you were done.
It was over.
Yep, absolutely. Now we've already reached number 10. The drum roll begins. Who's your number 10, my friend?
Number 10 is none other than Andy Kaufman.
Wow, your list is amazing. I debated listing him as a wrestler, but you know what? That's one of the biggest angles in the history of anything. And what people don't realize, and more fans that I've talked to didn't realize, there was more to the Lawler-Kaufman feud than the pile driver match. Mr. Kaufman stayed around for a long time. That was a long program, wasn't it?
That's what I didn't realize in all my research and everything, because that was, Bob, that was before my time. So,
Mhm.
like you said, everybody that sees like the pile driver and everything, but no, they were able to incorporate some other stuff like a Ken Pater or a Man Mountain Link in those feuds. And no, like Kaufman, they worked the territory. They made it work.
But what
And I
people don't
cannot
realize,
think of.
I don't mean to cut you off, but people don't realize too, the appearance on the Letterman show was part of the ongoing feud. It was the greatest use of a national publicity segment. It was unheard of in wrestling at the time and made headlines all over the world.
And Andy Kaufman also makes number 10 too, because on all the things that I just racked my brain and I could think of, there is no one greater instance than kayfabe than that. Staying at a hospital and the commercial pill picking up, you're in there with a broke neck and you're really not. He was willing to go through all that. I mean, tell me a greater example of kayfabe ever in the history of professional wrestling, Bob, please.
It's hard to top that. Hard to top it. I mean, at least when Bruno Sammartino went to the hospital with a broken neck, he had a broken neck, But in this case, he even had the doctors hoodwinked. He did, from what I read. Right when he was in the hospital, they said, "Well, if you feel that bad, it must be bad." Amazing.
Absolutely, because think about it too, though. The commercial appeal would have picked it up the next day. Well, Andy Kaufman fakes, broke neck injury in Memphis wrestling. That never came out. No, Andy was seen at, in a Memphis hospital treated for a broken neck.
And I'll tell you what, it was just yesterday. I didn't know you were going to bring him up. Just yesterday, I'm scrolling through Facebook, like I have a tendency to do in my old age, and there's a beautiful black and white photo. I wish I knew who took this photo of one of the pile drivers, and Lawler was up there. He went up before he came down so high that it really, what? If those physicians saw that tape, they go, "Yeah, he's hurt," because those pile drivers were brutal, brutal looking.
Well, and that's a great point too, because everybody knows that even if it wasn't a brutal pile driver, Lawler could make it seem like it was a brutal pile driver. Like as JR would say, no normal man would ever get up from a pile driver like that. So not only Lawler making it look so real, Andy selling it. Best example of kayfabe ever, in my opinion.
And I'll have you know that at that time of that match, I used to watch Channel 11 news here in the New York City area. They had the tape on the sports of that moment of the Lawler pile driver on Andy Kaufman on a news show on the sports. And I'm like, and actually, I remember that the sports announcer was, the commentator was Jerry Gerard, and he put down the wrestling fans because he was noticing that he didn't know the backstory of the feud, and as he's noticing as the gurney is going down the aisle with Andy Kaufman on it, it's being pelted with garbage. And he goes, "Look at those wrestling fans, classy as always." He didn't realize what Kaufman had done to egg those fans on like that.
Oh, those people were glad to see him laid up in a Memphis hospital. Like people cheered, like he ran down the people, their families, the South, Southern traditions. Oh, if you were from the South, you were a hick in Mr. Kaufman's eyes. People despised him, and he could. Another, like you talked about Jimmy Hart earlier. You just wanted to wring Andy Kaufman's neck. You wanted him to get what was coming to him.
And I'll tell you what, if people are hearing the sound of my voice, get yourself a copy of or try to find the film I'm From Hollywood. It is the entire history of the Lawler Kaufman feud, with interviews with everybody, with fans, with the participants, with It's a great little piece of work. I'm from Hollywood. If you haven't seen the intricacies of the Lawler Kaufman feud, get your hands on that because that's good. Have you seen that?
I have not.
Oh, it's fantastic. You've got to see it.
I do. I have to see this. Thank you.
It's awesome. It's got a lot. It's got interviews with Hollywood stars who knew Andy Kaufman. They all thought he was going crazy to do the wrestling. They have interviews with Lance Russell. They have interviews with a lot of people who are just normal fans sitting on their back porch, sitting in the swing, talking about the intricacies of the Lawler Kaufman feud. It's fabulous. You got to see it. You got to see it.
Okay, will do. Thank you. Will do.
So that's an amazing top 10. Now I have my little scribbled notes here. And by the way, I still use paper, fans. You hear that? Because I'm old. I use paper. And he does.
Now here. Yeah.
So anyway, on my top 10, I had Eddie Gilbert. Because
Great
I think
choice.
he was, again, really vicious little guy. He when he became a heel, he was real good at it. And remember when he would mock Jerry Lawler wearing the crown, and he would throw the fireballs too, and he ran him over with a car, and just go on and on the list of that feud. And another guy, shorter of stature, but you never knew when the bell rang. He was a whirling dervish in there, just a star all over the wrestling world. And then I also had Jerry Jarrett on the list.
Oh, great one. Great one.
Because he wrestled too. People have a tendency to forget that, the younger fans. But he was a big star and a very good looking young man, just like his son, Jeff Jarrett, who was also on my top 10. And I think I also had Tommy Gilbert on the list, because who did more in the Memphis area than Tommy Gilbert? I mean, he's another legendary name, and you'd agree with that, I think. And let me see here. This last one you may not agree with. I just think because of his overall influence in his long, long career in the city, Eddie Marlin.
Eddie Marlin. You can't forget about Eddie Marlin.
No, you can't. So there you go. This is where our list differed. And let's talk about other people. I'm going to talk now about someone who I think is your favorite wrestler of all time, Brian Christopher. Am I right or wrong?
Brian Christopher is my all-time favorite wrestler.
Now, why is that? I've always meant to ask you why you're so high on Brian. It's not that he wasn't great, and I'll tell you what. I think the most remarkable thing he did is when he went to the WWF without anybody mentioning the family deal going on. That Lawler was his father. He got over on his own. Same in Memphis, really. He got over without having to say, "I'm Jerry Lawler's kid," over and over again. So that had to be hard on him. Just to make his own way without, copping to all that.
Well, I want to the fans envision where I'm coming from on Brian Christopher being my all-time favorite wrestler. Okay, take it today's era. Okay, a national stage MJF, master heel like that. In Memphis, Brian was our MJF.
Mm-hmm.
We had the exact same feelings as a national fan base would have towards MJF. Brian could emotionally invest us like that. He could talk just like his dad, the King, but he was a more souped up Hulk Hogan looking version of Jerry Lawler. And he had a great body. He could work, and he could have you emotionally invested. He could have you hating his guts too. But also as a fan favorite, you wanted to see Brian walk away with that title and that 3 count. I mean, he could work both sides of the coin. And also got to give Brian a lot of credit too for imagine what chip you had on your shoulder coming from this territory, being the son of Jerry the King Lawler. Imagine how emotional tough you had to be to carry that as well. A lot of people don't realize that MJF didn't have a dad he's walking in the shadows of.
Mm-hmm. Something, you make a tremendous point there. The MJF Brian Christopher comparison, fans, get yourself some early 90s Memphis tapes and watch Brian Christopher, and then turn around and watch MJF. That is a really good comparison, because Brian had a mouth on him, man. He could talk up a blue streak, and so can MJF. And they were both snarky in the same way. Very good comparison. I never thought of that one, but now that you say it, it's perfect.
One of my all-time favorite Brian Christopher moments where he'd won so much gold. He told Dave Brown that he didn't want to hurt his back, so he invested in the little red wagon from the hardware store to pull around to carry all his gold in.
You have no idea how popular the Little Red Wagon was around the PWI offices. He was cracking all of his up with those promos. Don't touch my Little Red Wagon.
And that one time he brought a scale out there to weigh all his titles, and Dave accused him of adding 10 pounds on every title.
Oh man, those were the days. The early '90s. That was a great. That was the early '90s was a very underrated period of Memphis wrestling. They made a lot of stars then. And
no disrespect to Randy Hales or anything, but in one sense that Memphis Wrestling died. Memphis Wrestling's had a couple deaths in reverse, but another death of Memphis Wrestling was when the USWA closed shop and and '97. I mean, nothing against Power Pro, and I'm glad I had Power Pro as a young fan from '98 to 2001. Great, stuff on that. But in a way, Memphis Wrestling died after USWA as well too, though.
Yeah. There was a case where trying to expand might have not have been the best idea in the long run. You know what I'm saying? Because it's like you had those guys going back and forth between Memphis and Dallas all the time. It had to be hard on them.
Well, it was really just, it was nothing against Power Pro. It's just times had changed, and it was really hard to run against like the Attitude Era and what was going on nationally, just to keep the bills paid in Memphis, Tennessee, running a wrestling show at that time. And and you got Monday Night Raw and Nitro, and how can you run Monday nights at the Mid-South Coliseum when you can stay home and not pay anything and watch some really cool wrestling for free? They had to start changing days and stuff at that point. Well, now we're on Tuesday nights or Thursday nights, and it just by the seasons bring change, and just with the change of the landscape, the opportunity just didn't present itself any longer. It didn't.
That's a very good historical point you make, because you're right. Memphis really was the last of the big territories to go. And the times just called for it. You're right. Now, because we're getting short on time, I'm going to go down my long list of people who made their mark in Memphis. All right. Now I'm looking around here. Let's not forget Jeff Jarrett. Come on. Super baby face in the beginning. Fans loved him, boy. He was the golden-haired boy for a long time in Memphis before he decided to turn
before
heel.
He was the chosen one.
That's right. So you know what? A real gentleman in my dealings with him. I really enjoyed meeting him, and glad to see he's still having success out there on his own.
If I can, let me piggyback real quick from a fan's point of view in Memphis. We were so happy and thrilled and excited when we turned on like our WWF station and we saw Double J on there. Jeff Jarrett had made it from Memphis. We all love Jeff Jarrett here. Jeff Jarrett, phenomenal as a young boy. Taking a picture with him at Memphis Wrestling at the Mid-South Fair, right by the Mid-South Coliseum. I mean, wonderful memories. And yeah, Jeff, and Jeff Jarrett's not one of those that just didn't make the list because he's not Double J Jeff Jarrett. There's simply, far as historical, there just wasn't the room. But Jeff Jarrett, one of the greatest professional wrestlers the world has ever seen. Double J Jeff Jarrett.
Hey, look, these lists are all subjective. Just to be, no, he has been as good as it gets for a long time. And the fact that he's risen to the top in every promotion he's ever been in tells you everything you need to know. Had nothing to do with him being second generation. It had to be with him being Jeff Jarrett. And that was good enough. Great talker, underrated talker too. Very much so. Here's some more people. Eddie Marlin, like I said before. Randy Savage, who can ever forget him blasting his way through 2 territories in the area, just a tremendous. You had Coco Beware. Phil Hickerson, we cannot forget, for his various guises and various feuds and various tag teams. And he was a mainstay. And you know what? Younger fans would just say he's a big fat guy. Now he's a talented, strong man, and not an awful talker. He was, he was what he was. He was the brawn of Memphis for a long time, and I think he's a vastly underrated wrestler.
Bottom line, at the end of the day, Phil Hickerson could draw. He could put money in the seats.
And he did it for a long time. Let's not forget. There we go back in time. Let's not forget Don Green. Let's not forget Plowboy Frazier, who later became someone else in WWE, just like everybody else did. Let's not forget Doug Gilbert, Eddie's brother. Snarky guy. Yeah, he was good as a heel. I used to like him. He really mouthed it off on the Memphis TV show. Rick Rude had a wonderful run in Memphis. Great feud with Jerry Lawler. Austin Idol had a great feud with Jerry Lawler. Terry Funk had a legendary feud with Jerry Lawler, particularly the empty arena bout that they staged. Fantastic. Start of his career for Billy Travis.
Love me some Billy Joe Travis.
Yeah, there you go. We talked about Jimmy Valiant, Dr. Tom Pritchard, another mainstay for a long time. Underrated talker. I loved him on the mic. Oh, he sounds just like Roddy Piper. No, he did. He was Dr. Tom Pritchard. I hear that way too much. He was copying.
Man,
Piper.
him and Eric Embry were awesome together.
Yes, Eric Embry is also on this list, along with the dirty white boy Tony Anthony, sometimes with his dirty white girl Kimberly. Let's not forget that The Undertaker was the master of pain.
Master of Pain.
Mm-hmm. Great. He's all over the tape. You know what? He was not bad on the stick. I was just watching some video of him. He was pretty good as an interview, just kind of being a guy, not a character. And that was cool. Joe LeDuc, another great Lawler feud, right?
Yes.
Bobby Eaton for a long time.
Can't forget Bobby Eaton.
No, you can't. Bam Bam Bigelow passed through Memphis. Steve Dahl got his start in Memphis, I believe. Robert Fuller. You know something? Tremendous. I mean, as a talker, as a manager, as a heel, as a face, he tag teamed with Jeff Jarrett for a long time. I remember that feud against the Moondogs, which was right after the one with Lawler and Jarrett against the Moondogs. And while we're talking about it, those Moondogs, that version of the Moondogs was pure Memphis. You know, those were different Moondogs. And oh gosh, they were rough and tough. Rough. One of the toughest tag teams ever to pass through there. Do you agree with that or no?
Absolutely. There's been so many tough versions of the Moondogs. Spike, Spot,
Cujo, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Cujo. There were so many different variations, but all of them are very tough.
Chair swinging monsters. I mean, they were just brutal. I remember one time Jerry Lawler brought back one of the prelim guys and turned his back to the camera, and they put a close up on the guy's welts all over his back from getting smashed with a chair over and over again by the Moondogs. And their manager was Richard Lee. Is that right?
Yes, Richard Lee, and he could make you think. Richard Lee is somebody that doesn't get enough credit and due. Richard Lee could make you think he could control those Moondogs with that blow of that whistle. That they were just madmen from the swamps of Louisiana, uncontrollable. But Richard Lee was the only one on planet Earth that could control them dogs.
Mm-hmm,
Richard Lee doesn't get it, and he could talk too. He could have you hot.
Yeah, he's a wormy guy. You know, he was rough. Let's also
cheap suit. Wormy guy with cheap suits.
Cheap suits, yeah. Big ties. Let's give a tip of the cap to Jimmy Golden. Right? Let's give a tip of the cap. Let's go back a few years to the Infernos tag team, which was big point in Memphis.
Infernos.
How about Pork Chop Cash, right?
Absolutely.
Also passing through Memphis, Rob Van Dam when he was Rob Sikowski in the early 90s. Yep. I always talk about this, and I talk about it too much, but I'm going to say it one more time. In 91, in Memphis, I saw the greatest opening match I have ever seen, which was Rob Van Dam versus Nightmare Danny Davis at the Pipkin Building. And it was unheralded. They went for about 15 to 17 minutes, and let me tell you, every move was spectacular on both of those guys' parts. One of the greatest, like I say, still the best opening match in an arena I've ever seen. I knew I just... Go ahead. I'm sorry.
And that's a guy that probably didn't, and it's shamed on me. That's probably a guy that didn't make my list, and he might not have made your list. I don't know. But Danny Davis doesn't get enough credit.
No, I have him written down here. Yes, he's a big deal.
Nightmare Danny Davis.
Mm-hmm. And the Nightmares tag team.
Him and Ken Wayne. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Also passing through Hulk Hogan. People tend to forget that too. There was a big match between him and Mr. Lawler. Wolfie D, right? From that little tag team. I forget, PG-13, I think it was called.
Wolfie D, JC Ice, PG-13.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Buddy Landell, a lot of work in Memphis. Tony Falk, both as a referee and wrestler.
Good one, Tony Falk.
Yeah. Scott Levy was in for a few minutes, who was later Raven. Scotty Levy.
Him and Brian Christopher had a tag team.
That's right. Brickhouse Brown, how can we forget?
Can't forget Brickhouse Brown.
No. And, I'm going to read a bunch of tag teams here. And in no way is this list comprehensive because so many people went through Memphis. You can't even keep track. But let's give a tip of the cap to the Infernos. Jackie Fargo with his tag teams with both Roughhouse Fargo and Don Fargo. Don Fargo was all over the wrestling world. The managers, Ronnie P. Gossett and Burt Prentice in the 90s.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
And those tag teams, Rock and Roll Express, Midnight Express, fabulous ones, Alan Don Green, and who can ever forget Rough and Ready on television, getting their butts kicked every week. But the fans loved them for that. Somebody wrote on Facebook, "Oh, the worst tag team of all time, Rough and Ready." No, they weren't. They got a win on TV, and I saw it. So, how bad could they have been? But you know what? It takes a special person to be able to take a beating like that week after week. And they were, to me, there's no such thing as a preliminary wrestler. They're all wrestlers. And if they're good at what they do, like I've always said for years, I put as much respect for Gene Ligon as I do Ric Flair. They may not have been on the same spear as how they were promoted, but that doesn't mean that the guys who lose can't work. There's been a lot of guys in wrestling who lost more than they won that were vital to those promotions, like a Johnny Rodz here in New York, same way. So,
absolutely.
So I give guys like Rough and Ready all the credit because it's like you need those folks, or at least in our day, you needed wrestlers who
you need the Brooklyn Brawler.
You needed them, yes. It was very important. So there's a lot more people than I just ran, but these are the ones off the top of my head that I want to give a shout out to for entertaining us all so much in the history of Memphis wrestling, both the old school and the newer school into the 90s and 2000s. Memphis, and thank you, Lance Russell, Dave Brown, Corey Macklin, Michael St. John, down the list. Stacey Carter did some announcing for a while on one of those shows. I know there's announcers I'm leaving off, but no show had the flavor of Memphis wrestling.
It didn't. And let
me just allow me to finish, and I'll let you take over. To me, one of the great things about working at PWI was having it weekly. I'm up in New York watching those tapes as if I'm a fan at the Mid-South Coliseum, because the beauty part about they would, if you fans can imagine this, it was a studio show, but when something big happened, everybody there would film the matches at the Mid-South Coliseum and the other centers and do the play-by-play and then show them on television if something important happened. They were great. You didn't miss a trick. They were one of the few people that could run a weekly show. I mean, Memphis wrestling at its best was the best. I hand it over to you.
I totally agree with everything you said. And I want the fans and listeners to understand that these lists and everything, Bob, you and I could go on for probably 4 days and 40 days and 40 nights and still not name all the great professional wrestlers that came out of Memphis. So you mentioned some great ones, and I think you already mentioned a lot of the ones I had, but maybe I had a couple that you didn't have. And let's see, as you said before, like the interns, the medics, Billy Wicks, Buddy Fuller, the Dream Machine, Troy Graham, Dutch Mantell, Austin Idol, Jeff Jarrett, Brian Christopher, Hot Stuff Eddie Gilbert, Norvell Austin, Pork Chop Cash, King Cobra, Joe LeDuc, the Rock and Roll Express. As you said, Brickhouse Brown, the Moondogs, Bobby Eaton, Dirty White Boy, Gypsy Joe, Iceman King Parsons, Kamala. Killer Carl Truck.
Yeah.
Man Mountain Link, the Mongolian Stomper, Pez Watley, Phil Hickerson. I mean, the list just goes on and on and on. I mean, Memphis produced some stars. They really did.
I'll leave you with this. Pro wrestling is the only thing in the world where, as you grow up, you're booing that heel who does all those nasty things in the ring. Boo, oh boy, I can't stand that guy. Boo. I'm going to go buy a ticket to see him get beat. But you pass 30 years in these wrestling conventions, right? And you go up to that same heel with your your pen in your hand, wanting an autograph, going, boy, I'd love to hate you back then. Nothing else is like that.
Nothing else was like that. And getting to interview some of those heels and everything too, I'm like, well, you remind me of that because you said now at conventions going up to him, like for example, like I asked downtown Bruno, I'm like, well, Bruno, when everybody hated you, what would you do like if you're at the Cracker Barrel or somewhere and like somebody come up to you and ask you for your autograph or such? And he had a way of still maintaining character. Like he would sign, he wouldn't total like pull an MJF and be like spit on the kid and tell him to get out of there. That he wouldn't he was trying to eat his mashed potatoes and chicken. He wasn't getting an autograph, but he would sign it, but he would have some little snarky comment or something behind it, like, "Yeah, kid, that's the best autograph you'll ever get," at the, something like that, or always able to remain in character, but still have those. That's what still have that connection with the fans.
Is Downtown Bruno the nicest guy in the world? Because I'm getting the vibe that he's quite a fella from people that I know who have met him and talked to him. That he's a special guy.
Yeah, actually, we live close to each other, and I saw him in the grocery store about a week and a half ago. He said, "Man, when you gonna have me back on the show?" And I said, "Well, it's my birthday month, and I was thinking about having the mayor's birthday bash with special guest Downtown Bruno, and we kind of do from where you're the very first guest and where we started. We kind of do a catch up because him and I have become friends and everything since then, so we can kind of talk about that journey. And Bruno really gave us a chance, man. He believed in us, and first ever guest. We come out number 55 in the whole United States, starting a homemade podcast with Downtown Bruno. So much props to Downtown Bruno.
That's right. When I mentioned it, I forgot he was your first guest. That's right. Oh,
yeah.
Year goes by quick, doesn't it?
It does. It was like 6 days ago, like a year ago, I released my very first episode, Downtown Bruno.
Ladies and gentlemen, the name of the show, the podcast, is Wrasslin Talk with Mayor McCall. This is Mayor John McCall coming to you from the heart of Memphis wrestling country. And I just want to say thanks for being here again. Thanks for your friendship, your kindness, and keep it going. You hear me?
Well, it's honored that you picked me to talk Memphis wrestling with. So I'm I don't claim to be a historian or anything like that. I happen to be a passionate fan that conducts good factual journalism to take you back to the people that are there and talk about some of the memories and all. So I don't claim to be know it all, but I'm passionate about what I do, and I consider it an honor, a true honor that you considered me for the guy to talk Memphis wrestling with.
Well, it's my pleasure. You deserve this slot. And like I said, continued success to you and fans. Mayor McCall, thanks again.
Thanks for having me, Bob.
Ladies and gentlemen, Wrestling Fans International Association is back. That's right, the premier fan club association of the 1970s and 1980s has been revived and is back in business. Join today. It's free at thewfia.org. That's thewfia.org. You can also join us on Facebook at facebook.com/groups/WFIA 1969.
As I mentioned before, some really cool stuff is happening on the periphery here. I have so many shows to record within the next 2.5 weeks or so that my head is spinning. Some unbelievable guests are coming on the show. We have a concept show with Craig Peters coming up you won't want to miss. We're going to talk about nothing important. It's going to be called the Outdated Wrestling Comedy Hour. And I'm going to cop from a lot of different areas on that one. We're not going to talk about anything but trying to be funny. And I'll probably have the lowest ratings I've ever had, and I don't give a flop. You got to let some steam off, and Craig Peters and I are going to let some steam off. We're going to have a lot of fun with that one. But it is wrestling related, really. So I'm also about to appear on one of the top 5 wrestling podcasts in the world. I was asked to come on. And I'm hoping the person will come on this show. As soon as that is recorded, I will let the cat out of the bag and let you know what's going to happen. I'm thrilled about this one, as well as to be on NPR. Come on. Things are happening here, and you deny it if you want, but it's all true. So things are really cooking. As I mentioned at the end of the show, we're going to play the entire theme song by popular request, and I hope you enjoy it. If you can just shut it off when the music starts, and if you don't want to listen to it. So, but for those who do, this is for you. Okay. Our website is outdatedwrestlinghour.buzzsprout.com. Every one of our episodes is listed there. You can just tap on it. You got it. It's right there. If you don't want to fiddle with your apps like Spotify, which is fine to use, by the way, they're all good. Google Podcast is now gone. It has been morphed inside of YouTube Music. Same service, different name. Just in case you didn't know that. But we have acquired every podcast app you can think of, even Odyssey, where I can't imagine wrestling fans spend a lot of time, but we're on Odyssey. We're on things like Samsung News, which is another, that's the name of where they have their podcast, Samsung News. And it's built right onto a lot of Samsung telephones. So if you can't find us elsewhere, try looking on your Samsung phone under the files. You might find it there. Also on our website, which is outdatedwrestlinghour.buzzsprout.com, there is a little section for the Outdated Wrestling Hour fan club. For a nominal fee, you can join us and help perpetuate the continuing success of our little program. It's outdatedwrestlinghour.buzzsprout.com. Look for the black box, which tells you all about the OWH fan club. Write to us the old-fashioned way. No, don't send me a letter. Send me an email. outdatedwrestling@gmail.com. So it was really cool going down Memphis way, as Jack Reynolds used to say. And John McCall is one of a kind. He really loves his wrestling. I mean, he loves it with all his heart and soul. You could tell by talking to him and spend a little time with him. He is a very nice gentleman, and I'm glad to welcome him back to our show for a second time. Part of our coterie of friends and fans and fellow wrestling podcasters. Another thing we're going to work on soon is the second Outdated Wrestling Hour trivia quiz, and we are going to have a battle, a rematch, Liam Savage versus Anthony Pyrrhus. They're both chomping at the bit to come back. Now, all I got to do is come up with like 5 or 10 more questions, which ain't going to be easy because I really used all my brain power to come up with the first bunch. We're going to have some advanced rules on this one, and may the winner win a prize. I'll have a prize for whoever wins, and it should be really exciting. And it should be a lot of laughs and a lot of fun. So in any event, we're going to do that. There's a lot of shows coming. I can't even list all the people. And like I said, I have to do a whole mess of podcasts within a short amount of time. So I better get going. I got to get editing and mixing and all the other things that you do in podcast land. My name is Bob Smith. This is the Outdated Wrestling Hour. Nostalgia look back at the wrestling and the wrestlers we all really enjoyed. We try to keep it in the ring here. I don't give a rat's patootie what Tony Khan has to say. I don't care what goes on backstage. I don't think about who's getting pushed or who's not being put over. I'm here to pay tribute and have some fun with the wrestling and the stars. It gave us so much pleasure in the past and sometimes even right now. So if you feel like I do, if you're like, if the gossip doesn't turn you on, but the action does, we keep it in the ring here at the Outdated Wrestling Hour. Please come back. Please tell your friends. Do it the old-fashioned way. If you got somebody you know that likes wrestling, have them give the show a try. I think they might enjoy it. So until next time, this is Bob Smith saying, thanks, everybody, for the last few weeks. It has been a stone-cold blast.